great to see you here today. And today we are going to talk about strengths and how do you see your child's strengths. Now, sometimes this seems really easy at the surface, and maybe you say, I know my kiddo is kind or, creative. And sometimes it gets hard in application to really say, okay, great. Now what do we do with this? Or when expert advice is to use a strengths-based approach, what does that really mean? So the other problem or challenge can be, and I've been there too, is that your days are just so crazy and so hectic that you're in a place where it just feels even hard to see that, quite honestly. And honestly, I was there 5 years ago. And thankfully, through intentionality and whatnot, we're not there today. So it is possible to switch around, and that feeling feels so good. Of course, there's always more that we can do, and we're never going to reach perfection. But we want to, and I know you want to, dive into that ability to support their strengths and help the person in your life to flourish and become the best them that they can be. So we have with us today our ADHD coach, Luan Aldcorn Attridge, right? And she is a coach, families coach too, which means that she can work with younger kids and parents, and coaching parents how to help their younger kids, which is wonderful because sometimes these coaches can be difficult to find too. So glad to have you here today, and welcome, and share just a quick moment about yourself, and then tell us about strengths-based approach. What is it? What does that mean?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Luan, and I work with people that have ADHD. I work with probably about 6 years old, all the way to adults. And I also have a strengths-based approach in my coaching. I live outside of Toronto in a suburb called Oakville, and I coach people all over the world. I do also coach in-house for people that live in the vicinity. And I love working on all of these things because ADHD provides us with a lot of challenges, and it's important to learn how to work with it. And it's not that it's always going to be there, but there's ways that we can adjust our mindset. There's through strengths in particular, we can move towards these strengths and interests, both for ourselves and for our children. And when we do that, that's where our confidence builds. That's where we feel the most comfortable. We get energy from it. And for kids with ADHD especially, I find that, especially in the school setting, it's hard for kids with ADHD to sit there. It's hard for kids with ADHD to focus on what the teacher is saying. It's hard when they're really good at one thing and then they're not so good at another thing. That's confusing sometimes to parents and teachers. Well, how can you be so good at this and not so good at that? So people with ADHD, myself included, going through life, back in my day, I wasn't diagnosed. So you go through life and it chips away at you. You feel like, okay, well, I'm not very good at this. You tend to focus on the things that you're not good at instead of the things that you are good at. And this negativity bias is in all of us. But for kids with ADHD, as they go through the different stages of their life, they may be doing really, really good in elementary school, and then they move into high school, and then all of a sudden what's expected of them becomes more difficult for them to manage. So then they're back to a low confidence level. So the science behind strengths, knowing your strengths and working towards your strengths, is that as you build those strengths, it helps you have a broader perspective about your weaknesses. Okay, so you're more hopeful, you're more positive, you have a growth mindset. So when you have a weakness, you identify it as, okay, this is my weakness, but I can improve. I have the ability to do that. And that's why it's important for them to be able to frame their strengths along with their weaknesses.
Awesome. So then how do we get into the practicality? You just brought up growth mindset language. So
Mhm.
let's go into that for a quick second. Like what would that sound like in practical everyday life? Your kiddo is having a challenge, maybe saying I'm shutting down from doing schoolwork, or I don't want to do that math assignment. It's hard for me, or something to that effect. What can a parent practically say to help in those moments?
Well, we want to just take like one step forward. Okay. We're looking for progress, not perfection. So we're just asking them, if you can relate it to something that they do naturally, that they're naturally good at. Let's use piano as an example. Your child is, a great piano player. They love to practice. Every time they walk by the piano, they sit down and they practice a little bit. This happens naturally. You don't have to encourage them. But with math, you find, oh, geez, I got to more than encourage. Sometimes this turns into a struggle in our household. So one of the key things about having a strengths-based language in your household is you can say, how you're really good at piano. You're excellent at piano. How did you get to the stage that you're at in piano? And your child will say, well, I practice. Every time I go by it, I practice. I love it. I get energy from it. And you can put it into perspective. I know you don't get a lot of energy from doing your math, but you might get a little bit of energy if you improve a little bit. And if you apply the same techniques like practicing, you will see a little bit of improvement, and we just build on that. It's also really important for them to know everyone is unique. We all have strengths and weaknesses, because sometimes you're sitting in class and that kid that always gets 90% on the math test is sitting there and you're like, oh, that guy always gets 90%. I'm not anywhere near that. I'm horrible at math. So if they are able to have this strengths-based language, they are able to say to themselves, okay, well, I'm really great at piano, and Matthew is really, really great at math. I admire Matthew, and I might even ask him, Matthew, what do you do to get these marks in math? So you don't kind of, get into a little shell and say, oh, I'm not good at math. You actually have the ability to say, hey, what do I need to do just to improve? I may never be like Matthew, but maybe I can improve over time. And with my clients, that's what I see. I see over time, they start to gain confidence, and they know what they need to do, what strategies they need to put in place, what works for them personally in order to make the progress in these areas of weakness. So I think it's also important to point out that when you're focusing on strengths, it doesn't mean that you're ignoring the weaknesses. It just means that you're building their confidence. And kids with ADHD love that. They love to know that what they're good at. They love to be reminded of that. And it gives them a little bit of a dopamine hit. So they are, as we build that part of them up, when a report card comes in, instead of being like, oh no, I'm so bad at math, and the parents freaking out, okay, oh geez, math is out of control. We have the ability to put it into perspective. And we have, as parents and a child, and the child. So we're able to say, okay, well, focus on the strengths of the report card. This is amazing, but I am concerned a little bit about math. And then the child will respond, well, oh yeah, I just really don't like math. And you can say, okay, well, what are some of the things we can do to improve or to build on your math skills? And it doesn't have to be the biggest focus of everybody's life. It's just here it is. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. What can we do to improve it? And if it causes a big struggle, getting them to do homework, I know this is practical. It happens in my house with 2 children. You have to look at what are some alternatives available to me to help my child practice math. Is there some tutorial they offer after school? Is there a homework club? Is there tutoring? Is that available? If it's cost prohibitive, maybe there's older students that are willing to tutor your child. And then that takes the pressure off the parents in trying to, if they feel like they're nagging about homework or they're nagging about the certain areas that need work. Yeah.
That's awesome. So one of the phrases that I end up using often is progress, right? We're praising the progress all the time.
Yes.
And so with that focus, that comes across even then in everyday language within the family, our family. And I love it when my kids reflect that back to me, because then if I start to get overly like critical, because that's my tendency too, then they'll say back to me, but look at all this progress we made. I'll be like, thank you. That's perfect.
And them knowing that at this age is so powerful, because we are all wired for negativity. It's how our brains have evolved or not evolved, depending how you look at it. And so it's challenging that negative bias, and really for me, putting it into perspective. So let's change. If you change the lens that you're looking at, if you only focus on your child's weaknesses and improving those, you're really missing out on all the things that make them amazing. And they may never be a mathematician, or they may never be an engineer. And that's what part of this is about. We do need to get through school. We need to get, we need to graduate. And we want to keep as many doors open for our kids as possible. And I totally understand that in reality. But if you are able to focus on their strengths and they have the confidence in that, they will have the confidence to work on their weaknesses. So one of the things in growth mindset, I use a Big Life Journal. I might not have the exact name of their organization, but one of the things is that I'm not good at this yet. Right? So there's some hopefulness in it. I'm not good at math yet, but what are you going to do to improve it? Progress, not perfection. And that ability to recognize growth helps prevent perfectionism, which is a closed mindset. So they can aim for excellence, but it's more important that they don't get into a place where it's either perfect or it's awful, right? Yeah. We want them to know they can build and learn and improve everything.
Awesome. Totally a risk. So I'm glad you brought that up. Also, let's talk a little bit about the different types of strengths that there are, because it seems like I was introducing and saying it can seem easy to say, okay, they're kind or something else, or academically, maybe they have a strength in a certain area, but when that can get confusing when we're talking about a strengths-based approach. So can you add some clarity as to where are we looking for strengths? What does that mean exactly?
Okay, there's two types, and the examples that I gave earlier are more performance-based strengths. There are also character strengths, and again, this is a science, it's a proven science, and these scientists developed this approach in many different cultures. And so this transcends over, many cultures. And what they look at, there's 24 character strengths. And when you fill out the survey, we'll give you the website. There's an adult survey and a child survey, and it'll spit out a report with your child's top 5 of these 24. Okay, so they have the top 5, they have middle strengths, and then they have your last strength. So we all have all of these 24 character strengths in us. Just some are more natural to us. But again, growth mindset, it doesn't mean that we can't build on the other ones. And it's kind of good to know it. So my last one with ADHD is self-regulation. That's no surprise to anybody, I'm sure. So with self-regulation, just knowing that, it doesn't mean like, oh, I have enough self-regulation. What it means is that it's an area where I can improve, and I can work on it, and I can practice using it in my life. It doesn't mean that I ignore it, because it's not in my top 5. But if you are true to your top 5, an example that I give is, if you know that your child has a love of learning, that's one of the character strengths, and that they're curious. When they're asking you a lot of questions in a row, what about this, and what about that, and why this, and why did that, how does this work, and how does that work? instead of looking at it out of a lens like, okay, is he's being annoying, or my child is what's with all the questions? You can look at it through a lens of, oh, I know that my child has this love of learning and this curiosity. What are different ways that I can nurture this curiosity and love of learning? Because that is so critical to critical thinking as they go into post-secondary. So you're just looking for ways. You don't have to like completely focus on them. You can just be aware of them, and you'll hear it and read it in the report cards. You'll see a common thread. Your child is very kind. They're very they're a natural leader. They love learning. They just want to take it to the next level and connect it to real life things. So once you start hearing these things, you can start moving them into directions where they're going to feel really comfortable and what happens is they get a lot of energy and confidence. And if it's a sport, back to performance based, if it's a sport and you don't have to bother them to get ready for practice, they're ready with their water bottle. And this is not happening getting out of the house in the morning for school, but it does happen for what they do love to do. You can start to see that. You can say, okay, this is what they really love. So I just need, in their whole life, I need them to have these things that they love, even though they have to do a lot of the things that they don't love. That will help balance their lives and their overall happiness.
Mm-hmm. Combining some of the things that you've said, what I'm seeing is when we have those strengths, or when we can identify those strengths and help the kiddo identify that as a strength for themselves as well. And then for brains with ADHD, it's easier to operate in that zone of strength, right? And then you had just mentioned this earlier, and the challenges are reduced. So then they get that feeling, right, of what that's like. And you can come back to like, okay, what is it that you do there that helps you to be successful, and be curious about that, and then use that as a leverage point to say, okay, how can we apply that to an area where we're making progress in, right?
Absolutely. And the balance of that is so important, because back to the negative bias, if we only focus on the fact they're not good at math and that's how they evaluate themselves in the world, like, oh my gosh, I'm not really good at math, or even overall at school, I don't feel as comfortable at school as I do when I'm doing these other things. Because it comes easy to them. So let's say piano comes easy and this sport they're playing is very easy for them. Well, they're dismissive of their strength. They're dismissive of it because it just comes naturally. Like they're like, oh, well, that's no big deal. I'm just a really good soccer player. I'm just a really good, but it's because something is difficult for them that they put more importance on that, right? And so this is where I'm coming from, is that if you can balance those two things as a parent and say, it has to be, when you are praising effort or you are pointing out a strength, it has to be sincere, and for it to impact your child also has to be proud of themselves for doing that. So the earlier you start in having them identify their strengths and being able to verbalize them to you, the more they'll build on that naturally. One caveat to that is sometimes there's a difference between a hobby and a potential career. So when you're identifying your strengths and your character strengths and what's important to you, even if you are really good at piano, if you did that for a living and you were in a symphony and you had to practice at that level and you had to keep, learning, are you going to keep that love for it? Or is it better as a pastime because it's so relaxing and a hobby for you? So that, for me, that's where it gets a little bit more tricky, because you're like, okay, what is, my kid is really good at building things. Does that mean he's going to be a good engineer, or she's going to be a doctor? Or, like when you're thinking about those things, again, you have to even put that into perspective. Like what's a hobby and what's a potential career. And you can start doing this from a very young age. Even with interests, you can ask your children, like at 6 years old, I have a client who, she loves cats. She can tell me about every single cat. She has one of those grumpy cats. It's cat everything, cat on her leggings, black cats everywhere. And so when you ask her questions about what are you interested in, well, I'm really interested in cats. And you're like, oh, I wonder what kind of jobs, like in the future, do you think, or career paths could you take if you really like cats? And she could say, well, I could be a cat walker, probably not. I could be a veterinarian. I could be, a cat breeder. So you get them just starting to think about this, even though at 6 years old, of course she likes cats. By the time she's 19 years old, she might be into social issues. But what she'll know from when she was 6 years old is she can make the link between things that she's interested in and potential jobs that would be more fulfilling for her if she's in touch with that versus when she's not. So I had a client recently tell me she was in advanced classes in computer science, and she was coding and coding and coding and coding and coding. She's like, Luan, I do not want to code ever again, right? So even though she was good at it, it's not bringing her energy. And that's it. That's another thing to point out to your child. Like, yeah, you may be super good at this, but it makes you cranky, and it's hard for you. So we want them to be able to recognize that sooner too, so they don't get to a point where they burn out.
Right. You're reminding me of when I set the curve in my engineering classes in college and then proceeded to change my major.
Yes. And we want them to have that flexibility, right? We want them to know that flexibility is okay. And back to well-being, we want our children to be happy. The new phrase is well-being, because as far as emotions go, we can't be happy all the time. None of us can. But the theory behind this science is that if you align these things, your strengths, your interests, your talents, you are more likely to be fulfilled and have more well-being in your life, and more of a balanced life, frankly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that you just connected this to, like, not just today, but helping the kiddo become what might be most fulfilling for them as they grow mm-hmm. and step into adulthood. So that is awesome. Let's also really quickly, before we wrap up, address when you are feeling like it's just a hard place right now and it's difficult mm-hmm. to identify or see what the child's strengths might be, just because there's chaos and stress and all those things that can potentially go along with this, and relational mm-hmm. conflict, which is reality. So mm-hmm. What tips do you have for someone in that place?
It is very it's a complicated place to be in. And I remember at one point, my daughter in particular, she was very stubborn, and it was hard. It was just really hard to stay positive. And I remember talking to my doctor about it, and he said, you know what? These traits are going to serve her very well as an adult, right? She's going to be strong. She's going to be confident. She's going to speak her mind. And you got to put that into perspective. You're like, okay, this is hard for me to parent right now, but this is going to lead to her being really independent when she gets older. So that's one thing. The other thing you had mentioned, which I totally believe in, especially with kids with ADHD, because there is a 3 to 5 year maturity gap in some areas, especially executive function, compared to their peers that don't have ADHD. So you have to keep that in mind. And what I do, because you sort of lose track of time, because they're like a 13-year-old in some areas of their life, and then they're totally like a 9-year-old in other areas. And that's hard for a parent. That's hard because we're expecting them to perform at the 13-year-old level. So when you know that, what I have found most helpful, and the big aha from day one, is looking back further. So don't look back last week, look back a year ago, look back 2 years ago, and then you can see the progress over time. And I hope, does that satisfy? your question there, or?
Yeah, some good tips,
Okay.
but you sound like you have something else you want to say. Now I'm curious.
Well, it's just that as you know your children's strength, and one of the books that I referred to here, it's actually strength-based parenting now. Once you know more about this, it's easier if you know your strengths, you know your child's strengths, you have this language in your home. You're not as panicked about their ADHD deficits, because you are focusing on the fact that they're probably excellent public speakers. They're probably not shy, and maybe some are. I don't want to. But you'll know your own child's strengths, and if you can focus on that instead of the other things, these struggles in your household become less. If you can also, one of the things that Steve and I really benefited from, if there are patterns to your struggles during whatever it is, in our case, it was the morning. And anybody who knows me who watches this is going, oh boy, she's bringing up the morning routine again. But the morning routine, it was especially hectic. So if you know this, you can teach your child, okay, what can we do to make this look less hectic? And it may also be going all the way back to the weekend when they had a sleepover and they had 14 soccer games, and and they didn't eat and they didn't sleep, and so now this is what we're dealing with. So being able to know that in our case with kids with ADHD, it's not it's a can't versus won't, and really our kids can't. Okay, so it's not a behavioral issue. It's not them struggling with their parents. It's them struggling with their own brain. So we have to bring a big lens of compassion around that. And I promise you, as my kids are a bit older now, all of this, listening to these things and attending all of the topics that you have presented to your group are amazing. And just knowing this and carrying this with you will help in those real tough moments. And I know there's many of them. So look at the progress over a longer period of time, know that it will serve them well, and having ADHD is not determining how successful they're going to be when they grow up. There's many successful people with ADHD, very successful.
Yeah. I think a lot of times I challenge people to redefine what successful looks like. Because many people have achieved what is quote unquote often thought of as successful and not found happiness, right? So yeah, redefining that too. But
yeah, and expectations. Sometimes it's our expectations on our child, right? Yeah. So if you adjust those and be more aware when you're having that negative bias too, and you're starting to panic, well, how am I going to get them through grade 5? Just take a step back and go, okay, what can we do? What steps can we take? But I suggest always focusing on their strengths and being a soft place to land. And I'll leave you on preserve your relationship with your child above all else. Okay, over the course of time, regardless of what is happening. Like when you're like, oh my gosh, in the worst case scenario, go there.
Absolutely, because there's so many. I feel like this world with ADHD is filled with so many conflicting parts, right? It's like, this is good, this is hard. Like there's you need to focus on strengths, but it's balanced against there's a negativity bias, right? So there's all of these everywhere. And another one too then is this focusing on the strengths, right? But that's also difficult, and the expectation gap is there, right? So how do you see that expectation gap? So when I say expectation gap, I mean like what you were saying, that they're maybe they're 13 years old, but their executive function is at the 9-year-old level. And so being able to do that is just really, really, really important.
Yeah, it's a battle of self-regulation, right? Which is it's a whole nother topic that it is a great thing to bring up. And people really believe in all the doctors and researchers in this ADHD industry really believe that self-regulation is the key. And I think when you are confident and know your strengths, that also helps improve your self-regulation because you're better able to put things into perspective. But yes, this is a big topic, and as everybody can tell, I can talk about it all day. So
and the wrapping up words that you had of preserve the relationship, because that's the part that I was going to bring up too, in terms of the conflicting, conflicting isn't the right word, but preserving the relationship is like safety, right? And so when you have these lagging skills, one of the best ways to help raise them is to give them an environment of safety, which can be really difficult when everything is hard, but that's exactly what is needed. And so I love that.
And it goes against how we were raised sometimes. And so you might have parents who are judging you, or you might have, I had a pediatrician tell me once, Luan, you're not strict enough. You're not this, you're not that. So you really have to follow your own instincts and not get too caught up on society's expectations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard. It's hard. And I acknowledge that.
Thank you, Luan. Pleasure to be here. And for anybody still listening, if you would drop in what was something that was one helpful idea from listening to this talk, we would love to hear what you're going to take away then to apply for your life. When you write it in, you kind of lock it in for yourself, which is always valuable. So I look forward to hearing from you. And you can find Luan at
ADHDlife.coach.
Awesome. And that's right in the description up at the top. So thank you, Luan, and we'll see everybody later. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.